Is liberty dying where you live? Escape to Keene at freekeene.com. Considering Shire Sharing is in the middle of a major fundraising campaign. They're looking to raise $10,000, and they've got another 3 weeks to do it. So if you haven't yet chipped in to the Shire Sharing fundraising campaign, you can do that at shiresharing.org. And Amanda, can they give you money in person, like if they just hand you cash or a check today? So you can totally just hand Amanda some money if you have some that you would like to contribute to helping feed 500 families across New Hampshire. Amanda was a natural choice for the panel host. She's one of the most notable doers as far as in the charity space in the New Hampshire Liberty Movement. I'm proud to have her here at the second annual Keenevention, and she will introduce her wonderful panelists full of great folks who are also doing some cool stuff. So we'll find out more about that, and of course the microphone will be open for your questions as well. So Amanda Bouldin, welcome to Keenevention. Thanks for being here.
Hey guys. So this is Stephanie Murphy, Theresa Earl, and Dale. I know that. It's a bumpy start. So we're not experts, you know. So there's not like some big plan for, I don't know, we're going to talk about stuff and blow your mind. But we all have our foot in the door as far as volunteering or charitable work. So maybe we have some perspectives that you hadn't considered that maybe will inspire you to also get involved in this type of work. First, I wanted to ask if each of you guys would please introduce yourselves and explain why you're on the panel.
Should we start with you?
Oh, okay. I'm Amanda Bouldin, and I run an organization called Shire Sharing. That's Shire, S-H-I-R-E, as in New Hampshire, and the website shiresharing.org. We don't do much, just once a year deliver Thanksgiving meals to as many families in need as possible through entirely voluntary means. There's no one on the payroll, and we don't raise the money through coercion. And we do as much as we can. This is just me. I do as much as I can to get everything donated that isn't food so that the money that we do raise actually goes to food. And that's kind of how Shire Sharing works. Stephanie?
Hi, I'm Stephanie Murphy, and I am the Director of Operations at Free Aid. It's spelled Fr33 Aid. People who have ever been to the Porcupine Freedom Festival may know Free Aid because we've been providing volunteer first aid to PorcFest attendees since 2010. And Free Aid is basically an organization that does volunteer first aid services and also educates people about CPR and cardiac defibrillation. And there's kind of a voluntarist message in there because, you know, when someone has a cardiac arrest, it really makes a huge difference if there's someone around who's able to provide help by using a defibrillator and knowing how to use it. You can't always depend on the state to take them to the hospital in time or to be there for them. You know, that saying, when seconds count, the cops are just minutes away, it applies to ambulances too, often services that are really heavily tied with the state. I personally actually went to medical school for a couple years, but I left the medical field because medicine is just such a disaster in this country, both for a trainee going through it and for anyone who is unfortunate enough to need medical help. So really the point of Free Aid is to try to bring health services to a more voluntary level and to educate people about how that can be done. And we've been providing first aid to PorcFest attendees for free for the last 4 years and operating on donations. We're also a Bitcoin-only charity, and we now operate exclusively in Bitcoin. And so that's another aspect to our to what we're all about.
I don't have a huge charity background to kind of fall on. I have always been more into doing volunteer work. Since I was a child, I was doing a lot of volunteer work. And in Occupy New Hampshire and Occupy Boston, I had my first chance to actually try and organize. And so I did attempt to try a Food Not Bombs in New Hampshire. Oddly enough, it's rather hard to find volunteers sometimes. And so at this point, what I do is I primarily help organize events and help people with things like Shire Sharing, or things like where I feel that my skills are needed and helpful. And then outside of that, try and help other people who are looking for things to volunteer to do to help them to find the opportunities that they might be interested in.
I feel like I have to put a disclaimer out there that I'm not nearly as active as I used to be. Since I moved away from Keene, I haven't been attracted to a volunteer opportunity in the same way that I did. There was a shelter called, and there still is a shelter called 100 Nights in Keene, and it inspired me when it was first opening. Before it was opening, the word got out about this place that they were going to be an overflow shelter for the state shelters, or the city shelters, the government-run ones, and those seem to be rife with problems. I think this shelter was inspired when someone actually died from being out in the cold because they were kicked out of a shelter. So the idea was there to be this overflow shelter where people could go and just be there for the night, and then they were kicked out in the morning, but they had a place to sleep that was warm. And I got really inspired by it because they were trying to fix problems that the government shelters were not solving, or at least not sufficiently. And it was trying to be, from the beginning, they were trying to run it the way they wanted to run it, that they thought would be the most helpful to the community and get the most bang for the investment and the volunteer hours that people put into it. And they were constantly sort of struggling with that. So when that opened, I was already volunteering at the community kitchen, which is, it's also technically private. I think they do get some money from the city, and but I did that because I wanted to kind of, I like the idea of doing something in my community and getting closer to the people in my community and getting to know not just the people who needed our help, but also other volunteers. And you know, I wanted to be a closer part of the community of Keene because that's where I lived, and I had a home and everything here. So, and the other part of it, I think, is ever since I moved to New Hampshire, I had set things up such that I had a lot of free time and I controlled my own schedule. That's something that I hadn't had before. I didn't have a lot of money, so I wasn't necessarily in a position to donate a lot of money to charity, but what I had was my free time. So that was something that I was able to do. So I think that's the reason why I'm here, is primarily my involvement with that. And also I did a lot to encourage other people in Keene, my friends in Keene who were part of Free Keene and the Free State Project as well, to also volunteer there. And I think it worked out pretty well. I got a lot more people to show up there and get involved in it. So that's, I think, the reason why I'm here.
Well, I guess you kind of already covered this, Dale, but my next question, I wanted to know if you guys have like a story about what inspired you to start doing what you're doing and why you do it.
Yeah, so I guess I kind of mentioned this with dropping out of medical school, but Free Aid was actually started by a lady, Theresa. She lives in California. She doesn't live in New Hampshire. Free Aid's kind of a global organization. We're everywhere. But she actually worked at a medical device company that made cardiac defibrillators. And so she was really familiar with how they worked. And she thought, well, you know, if more people knew how to use these, then it really would be helpful in terms of assisting people in just helping their neighbors instead of relying maybe on these state-provided ambulance kind of services or relying on someone else to sort of help in a time of crisis when literally minutes count. I mean, if your heart stops, every minute that goes by without your heart beating, you've got like 10% less chance of survival. So by the time you hit 10 minutes without a heartbeat, you're pretty much dead. So it's really not enough time. In most major cities, an ambulance takes over 10 minutes to arrive, which is unacceptable. Most people are going to be dead if they have a cardiac arrest by that time. But we, as people who believe in neighbors helping neighbors, have the power to change that. So that was sort of the educational arm of Free Aid and why that got started. Also, the Porcupine Freedom Festival is Free Aid's flagship event where we do volunteer first aid. And that is an event that it's growing every year. It's been getting bigger. This year is going to be the 12th Pork Fest or something like that, and it's been just more people have been showing up. We've got 1,500, perhaps 2,000 people will show up this year on a little campground with a small medical center nearby, but really not much in the way of medical care. Also, a lot of people are using, let's be honest, some substances at Pork Fest. They're recreating with different substances, whether it's alcohol or whatever else, and they can get disoriented and dehydrated. Sometimes it's really hot. People get heat stroke. There have been some instances of Lyme disease with ticks and just other tick bites and insect bites that have looked pretty nasty. So there really is a need. Oh, and also lots of white people. Sunburns are always an issue. So, there's definitely a need for first aid at an event like that, so that some of those little injuries or illnesses don't turn into bigger ones. And that's why Free Aid's volunteers really wanted to come into Pork Fest and sort of help provide those services. And actually, there have been a lot of cases where people were really thankful that we were there. There was a light that fell and hit someone on the head one time in one of the halls. There was a severe allergic reaction to some peanuts or something that was in the fried chicken. Who knew? The guy had to go to the hospital. There have been a lot of instances of dehydration. It's really hot out there, and just kind of overindulgence in various substances where people didn't feel so well. So they were really grateful that there was someone to sit there and help them figure out if they needed medical attention beyond what we could provide. So that's been really great and fulfilling. As someone who went to medical school but didn't really feel like I was helping a lot of people there, didn't really feel like I was getting the chance to make much of a difference within that plodding, grinding medical system that really treats everybody, from the doctors to the patients, like just cogs in the machine. I really felt like I was making way more of a difference and getting a lot more fulfillment out of that volunteer work than out of the professional side of things. Also, people who are in the healthcare field, who are liberty-loving, are few and far between. It was not a friendly place for a libertarian in the healthcare field as a professional. So having a networking place where liberty-loving health professionals can go is really great for some people who feel just totally lonely at their jobs and feel like no one understands them and they're all cheering for Obamacare. I mean, it was like a foregone conclusion when I was in medical school that the government should ban things like guns and soda and trans fats for your own good, of course. So working with a lot of people who have those ideas can be very isolating for someone who doesn't have those ideas. So part of also what Free Aid does is provide a safe place for liberty-loving health people. So yeah, I guess that's what inspired us.
You should avoid sodas and trans fats, but it shouldn't be banned. You should avoid them.
For your own good.
I don't have a huge story about how I came to volunteer. I've always just been a helper, so I'm the kind of person, if somebody needs something, I'm going to try and figure out a way to help them. And if I can't help them, then I'm going to try and find a way for somebody else to be able to help, and that's just who I am. How I do that has changed significantly. I didn't go to medical school, but I did used to sell pharmaceuticals. And the story behind what happened once I actually started looking at the pharmaceutical industry that I was working for, I sold insulin, looking at diabetes and what's going on with regard to that. It gave me a lot of direction in terms of where I want to focus my time and energy. And then
what was going on with insulin? I'm just curious.
Well, I sold insulin, and so I would be going around to doctors' offices talking about type 2 diabetes, which is going to be killing about 1 in every 4 Americans. By the year 2020 was the estimation, but I think we might have actually almost gotten there already, because the disease is just, our diet is poison, and based in corn products like high fructose corn syrup and things like that, and those things are causing our bodies to become ill, and we're dying and getting obese and sick. And that's just one little tiny part. That's like a sliver of what I started to learn. And so I try and focus on learning to grow my own food, and if I ever can figure that out, then I'll be showing other people how to do the same thing. So it's really, for me now, more about trying to find the time to do the things that are most meaningful to me, because everybody can always use your help everywhere, and if you're not aware of what your limitations are, then you'd be spread too thin to be actually able to help anybody.
I think I can expound on what I said as far as like what inspired me and things like that, because like I said, I had a house in Keene. I was settling in. I wanted to get to know my community, so doing volunteer work is a great way to do that. And I felt like I kind of wanted to know what exactly was going on. I wanted to actually meet some of these people who were homeless, either temporarily or longer term, and how they'd gotten there. And really doing volunteer work dispelled a lot of myths for me. I think a lot of people have perceptions about the homeless, that they're lazy, that they're mentally ill, and some of them are, but there's all these perceptions about the homeless and why they're there, that a lot of that got dispelled for me. And they my mic keeps cutting out a little bit. Okay. And you know, so there are all these perceptions about the homeless and why they're there and how they ended up in that situation. And a lot of that got dispelled for me, and I realized more and more how close so many of us are to being in that situation. There were I knew people who, for instance, were contractors who were making lots of money, and then the economy just fell out from underneath them, and they were just suddenly not getting jobs anymore. And they really hardworking people, and they continue to be hardworking even as homeless. Like, one of the things about this shelter that I really liked was they tried to hire actual homeless people to do the things that the shelter needed, like work on the shelter itself. He hired this guy who was a contractor and helped him out a lot. So a lot of this was about actually making some kind of change that would actually get people off of the street, as opposed to the kinds of things that the city was doing that just sort of perpetuated the problem and put a Band-Aid on it and kept a lot of things going. So that the shelter itself and how it was being run inspired me and made me want to get more into it. Although I was doing, like I said, I was doing some work for the kitchen before that, but I was starting to get more and more disillusioned with the kitchen, and I did both for a while. And then eventually I kind of didn't like how the kitchen was running some things, and started just working for the homeless shelter. And I was putting in quite a lot of hours there. They needed people to stay there overnight, so stay up all night in case people came in the middle of the night, and also just to kind of keep an eye on things and be sort of a chaperone for the shelter. So
I'm curious, why were you disillusioned with the soup kitchen?
Well, see, here's the thing: is I think that when one of the things I hope we get to address today, and I'll just, I guess, get into it, is how do we get people to do charity work, and hopefully, because I feel like it's something that's needed, especially when there's this perception that this is stuff that's supposed to get done, and now we have this perception that the state does it, that the government does it, and I don't think they do it well. I think it's their motivations for it all get corrupted, and the whole process gets corrupted by that. So one of there was a study done that says how you get people to like you is not by doing nice things for them. The way you get people to like you is to get them to do something for you, and then to be really sincerely grateful for it, like to show your gratitude with a lot of sincerity. Because I think we all have a need as humans to have a purpose, and when we've helped someone, because we're social creatures, that's actually very satisfying for us. So I think it's getting people to be charitable or to do volunteer work, I think, is something it's really something that comes naturally for us already, and we just have to encourage that. And I don't think they were doing that at the community kitchen. There wasn't this sense of them being grateful for me coming for my help there. And I think it's just like management was changing. The people they hired new people, and it started out fine, but they started trying to change things more and more in this direction that, I don't want to get into details, but I felt like they didn't appreciate their volunteers. I was like a long-term volunteer that showed up every week on time, and I was very committed to it. I treated it like a job. If you're doing volunteer work, you're just as necessary as a paid employee. They're still counting on you, and if you're late all the time or things like that, just because you feel like, well, I'm not getting paid, I don't need to be on time. Yeah, you do. There's still people depending on you. And but I needed to be appreciated, and I didn't feel like they really did appreciate their volunteers. And so it started to become very unsatisfying. And I was also meeting these people who were coming and eating at the kitchen. I'd meet them at the shelter and sit down and talk with them. And I'd find out from their end things that weren't working out as well there because of how they were changing things. And so eventually I just started wanting to spend more and more time at what I thought was a more effective charity. and for the amount of effort I was putting into it and things like that. So that's what inspired me. And unfortunately, I haven't yet been inspired by something in Manchester other than like Shire Sharing, which is just an annual thing. It's not a year-round thing that I want to, on a regular basis, go and put my time into it. But I really, it is something I miss since I kind of want to find something like that in Manchester. I may have to dig a little deeper.
I guess there's a question.
Yeah, so I was just wanted to come up here quickly to follow up on the homeless problem. One of the things that I've noticed, I spend a lot of time walking around downtown, and there are some homeless people there, and I won't give them money because I don't think that that's the best way to help them. But I will, offer them, a drink or, food, and so often they don't accept it. But I get the sense that they're controlled by money. They're money. It's what they want from you. And so I feel like they're not free because the money is a constraint on them. So I was wondering if you could, with your insight with, working with the homeless people, how can we, like our community is more liberating, and to free them from this constraint of just wanting money so that they can become more autonomous. I don't know if that makes a lot of sense to you. You got to confuse. Is anybody else?
Can I clarify what I think you're asking?
Right.
Okay. So you don't, if you see someone who's homeless, your inclination is to not give them money, right, because you feel as though they are constrained by money?
Right. I want to help them become autonomous.
But not by giving the money?
Right. Okay.
I understand your question, but I don't have an answer for you. I'll tell you, my perspective is that I have no right to, if I can only determine what I'm willing to offer somebody for assistance. So if I'm willing to offer them money, I gave somebody $2 when I was getting off the exit to get here because he had a sign that says he needs a bus ticket. So if he has a sign that says he needs a bus ticket, I'm assuming he needs a bus ticket. So I gave him a couple bucks and went on my way. If I was walking down the street but previously and I gave somebody a sandwich, like that was what I had at that moment. But ultimately I think that who better to determine what a person needs than that person themselves? And so I can't really think of how you would be able to show somebody autonomy in that way that you're talking about.
Okay, I mean, it was a problem that I had. I just don't know how to...
I was trying to clarify the question to see if I could come to an understanding, but I can understand the question, but I don't have an answer.
I understand your, when you say you don't want to give them money, I'm exactly the same way. I've done... I'm kind of defending myself, I guess, and if you consider how much effort and time I've put into helping the poor and the homeless, but I never just hand money to them. Ever since I started doing charity work, I've never just handed someone money on the street or something, and I tend to agree. I don't feel like that's the best way to help them. I'm trying to give them the resources, like give them a place to sleep at night if necessary, give them food if they need it at the kitchen, and even help them to get jobs and things like that. At the homeless shelter, they did a lot like that to help people. Like one of the problems the one thing about the homeless shelters, they were figuring out what sorts of barriers were keeping people from changing their situation. And it's a lot of things that are largely beyond their control. It's hard to get somewhere to take a shower when you're homeless for an interview. It's hard they want an address when you go to an interview. And not having an address where they can contact you, or a phone necessarily. Someone can't afford a phone. There's things like that that are huge barriers. And then, and the other thing I was thinking about when you said, I just don't want to give them money. A lot of people say, well, I know they're going to go and spend it on booze, right? And that's actually, my impression is that's true a lot from having been close to these people. But one thing I want to say about that is, well, you might have this impression that they're drunk and that's why they became homeless, and they're irresponsible because they're drinkers and they became homeless. And I really felt, after talking to a lot of people, that it was the other way around, that really a lot of people, if they're miserable in our society for whatever reason, and a lot of times societal issues are causing them to be miserable in the first place. The things that made them homeless in the first place are also making them miserable. And people self-medicate, right? When they're horribly, horribly miserable and depressed, probably for valid reasons, not having a home, or horrible things have happened to you because of because of economic issues and things like that, then yeah, sometimes people self-medicate. So it is very possible you're going to give that homeless person money and they're going to buy alcohol, but they're really just trying to cope and with some really tough things. And it is kind of self-perpetuating at that point. It does get harder to get off the street now that you're an alcoholic and things like that. So I just would rather, I try to do things I think are going to be the most helpful for them, and I don't think giving them money to buy a drink is, even though that's what they want, and I understand why they want it, is the most helpful thing.
There's always this issue that comes up in when you talk about charitable work of the long-term versus the short-term, and it's like, if you see a person who's homeless, or for instance, a person who's had a heart attack, let's just say, they have an immediate pressing problem that needs attention right now, which is that they're potentially sleeping in the cold, or they're about to die because their heart has stopped beating. But there's also a lot of underlying root issues behind that even if you can cure their immediate issue, if you can restart their heart, or if you can get them off the street for this tonight and give them a meal, what's going to happen to get them unhomeless, or to get them to the point where they are not in a state of unhealth, which is leading to cardiovascular problems, in the long term. And it's always easy to criticize a charity who focuses more on the short-term stuff, the triage, than the long-term. People always talk about homeless shelters and, well, what are they doing to get this person unhomeless, right? But both are valid. I mean, if they don't get help with the immediate thing, they're not going to last to get help for the long-term thing. So we need both, but we also need to remember that it's important to take care of the short-term emergency stuff too.
And on that note, I do have an opinion, I guess, that I've been pondering for a couple of years about the long-term problem. I read a book that's, you can download it on freekeene.com/books, and it's called Healing Our World in an Age of Aggression by Dr. Mary Ruart. And that book kind of sent me down a rabbit hole, I guess, of thought about why people stay poor. Because like Stephanie's saying, there are things happen, your house burns down, or whoever was paying your bills dies, or there's a natural disaster, or you lose your job, and life sucks for a little while, maybe a long while, and a lot of people get out of it and they go back to normal. But some people stay down forever. And why does that happen? And I think it was when, in 2011, Shire Sharing handed out a bunch of backpacks to homeless people in Manchester, full of first aid supplies, socks, and hand warmers, and gloves, and hats, and stuff like that. And we met the people, and I don't want to admit it because a lot of people donated and volunteered to make this happen, but it was totally underwhelming. The big climax of handing out the backpacks, they were just like, thanks, whatever, and they left. And I left that day from Veterans Park realizing that we hadn't really done anything. And they were going to stay homeless, and they could probably get those supplies from anyone. And then I read a lot of articles, I guess, that are more with a psychology aspect and not so much about economics. The politicians are always yelling about, we need jobs and job creation and all this business, but they're not focusing on what it's like to be one person who doesn't have enough money to get by or doesn't have a job. And I think that for the majority of people that are in a low-income or homeless situation, they have an emotional problem. Obviously, there are people that are always going to need welfare, people that are born disabled or become disabled, whether physically or mentally. And I think that, I think people should help them and take care of them. I'm not a Darwinist. I don't think that people should just die if they can't make it. But aside from that, we have a lot of people on welfare in this country that there's nothing wrong with them physically or mentally, but emotionally, they're just broken. And I think that was the case for me in my life a few years ago. I was working as a janitor because I really thought that was the kind of work that I qualified for. And now, a few years later, I've been through enough experiences where I'm realizing I'm capable of more, and that I'm relatively intelligent and driven and whatever, but I think that really what it is that we have this culture of like, get a job, like if your life sucks, get a job. And there's no entrepreneurial spirit anymore. And people that are down and out, rarely are they like, well, I'm going to get out of this by making pizzas in my kitchen and selling them to my neighbors, and maybe I'll cover half of rent and my landlord will work out the rest of it with me. Or, there's none of that happening. People are like, well, I don't have a job, I'm screwed, I'm going to go apply for welfare, and other people are going to carry me through it.
Often it's illegal to make pizzas in your kitchen and stuff like that too.
Yeah, and so it's not just a cultural thing, this get a job mentality. It's promoted by all of the tight regulation that the government has in place, from the federal level on down to the city level.
We should get into the food not bombs and people trying to do charity to feed people and the government not approving of how they're doing it and thinking they're protecting people and taking food out of their mouths sometimes.
Yeah, there was this, in Florida, I read this article a few years ago, a bunch of homeless people in some area of Florida found an abandoned piece of government property. The government was not taking care of it and didn't seem to need it for anything. And they gathered up materials and built a shanty town. So they made their own homes, and they were no longer homeless, and the local government came and tore it down and kicked them out because they didn't have the right to be there. It's ridiculous.
I was thinking about it while everybody's been talking. I think you should think about what it is that you can offer someone when you see them. Like, take some time outside of this space to kind of think about what is it that you would like to give someone. Like, it might be a backpack, or it might be a drink, or it might be a card to a recruiter or something. Like, think about what it is that you can offer that person, and then just offer that, and let that be enough, knowing that that's where you came from with your own intentions and your own autonomy. That's about the best that I can come up with for that.
You were talking about how it's an emotional problem sometimes. It's not necessarily mental illness in the way that most people think of it, but just, I think about how many of us have figured out some way to get out of the rat race, like do your own business sort of, and maybe an agri style while you're not doing it officially and properly with all the licensing and things like that, and maybe there's some risk involved or whatever, but you've kind of stepped out of the rat race to some extent or another. And I think maybe a lot of these people, when if it seems like they just stay down, like Amanda was saying, they just seem to stay down. I wonder how much they were in the rat race and they worked really hard, and then something happened, and then the linchpin came out of it, and it just and then suddenly they had nothing. And how after going through that, and depending on just how bad that fall was, how inclined are you now to start clawing your way back up and like re-enter the rat race? I think a lot of homeless people, to some extent they're there because like they've decided that's a kind of freedom for them. And then they realize that, well, how bad do I want all these material things, even if it's a home, in this, if it means getting back into the rat race and clawing my way back in and fighting for every little thing. And I don't know. I mean, so maybe addressing some of these problems long term, like the long term solution versus the short term solution. Maybe the long term, we need to examine examine our society and how we have to survive right now and get by in it, and how depressing can that be sometimes. Like I've kind of escaped the rat race myself. I support myself completely, but I don't do it with a 9-to-5 job anymore. I've got my own ways of getting by and everything, and so it's been incredible for my mental health, I think, to be out of that rat race somewhat, So I don't know, just something that you made me think about when you said, why do they stay down,
You have a question?
you've begun to address some of the issues, but basically was, is it incumbent on... Closer to the mic. Sorry. So I've talked to a lot of homeless people, and some of them are homeless on purpose. Like as you mentioned, basically they've decided that it's better for me to live as a bum on the beach in Puerto Rico, or I met one guy who just liked to walk around the country. And then I've been told by some people, and we have this in the area where I live, where it's kind of an affluent neighborhood, and if you get home at the right time, you can see some people being dropped off at strategic locations in front of Wegmans and the exit from Route 30, where it's clear that they're making more money probably accepting dollar bills from these people than they would ever make at a job. And so I feel like that gives some people the idea of you need to get a job, like get off your butt, and it's hard to distinguish them between the people with emotional issues, like you said. So is there any way you perceive and kind of, I don't know, how separate these two groups in people's minds and allow some understanding that there are some people with real issues, and they're not all of this, maybe 10% of this group that...
It's true. They've done investigations and studies on it, and they found that you probably will do better than minimum wage by panhandling. So at some point, you're like, why get a job at that point? You're asking them to demote themselves. And so...
I guess the way to differentiate between those types of people is to talk to them. I mean, it's true. People are homeless for all different kinds of reasons, from people who got divorced and now they have nothing, including a home, and previously were very wealthy, to people who are doing it voluntarily because they don't want to pay property taxes, or they just rather live out on the road. That's freedom to them in a way. To people who have medical problems and mental illness. I mean, so really the only way you can differentiate is just on a case-by-case basis. But that's the thing, like nobody wants to talk to homeless people in particular, I think. Like there's this real stigma against them of like, you might catch it if you talk to them, you know, like it's almost like it's contagious or something. And it's not, like you won't catch it. It's okay to talk to them, and it might be interesting to hear more about their story, but only if you have time. Like I think that might be kind of what you were saying, Theresa. It's like, if you feel generous, if you feel like giving to somebody, give them what you can or what you have in that moment to offer them, including nothing. That's perfectly okay. You don't owe anybody anything. It's just that you can sometimes get a sense of fulfillment or a connection with someone you might not have connected with before if you do give.
Matt?
I have two items for Amanda. First, your website, Shire Sharing, says that you take checks, and I'd just like to know to whom to make the check.
Why did you have to ask that? I'm actually having some problems with the bank this year because they decided this year that Shire Sharing... Bitcoin. Yeah, Bitcoin.
But, I mean, I might do Bitcoin. I just wanted...
my bank this year decided that Shire Sharing is not an entity.
Oh.
So I guess the government, has increased the restrictions or the regulations for my bank, or either that or my bank had an internal memo where they decided to start following the rules. So that's a great question, and right now you'll have to write a check to me. Because, yeah.
That's fine. Okay.
Yeah. Last year, previously people have been able to write checks to Shire Sharing. It sucks. It's not 501c3, and it's not recognized in any way
that's fine.
By the government, so it creates a lot of problems.
The second item is a suggestion. So when you go and deliver the meals to each family or individual, it's you have a case-by-case thing where you like survey the people and deliver meals according to, like, say if there's a vegetarian. Am I correct in that?
Yeah, the bags are special for
right,
each
they're
family.
specialized. So I was thinking that it might be productive because people consider pets part of the family. If you do like some sort of like pet survey, and then like if they have a person has a dog, have like a bone or some sort of like fancy feast, like think if they have a cat or goldfish, whatever, have like a treat because that might boost the morale of the individual or the family, and Furthermore, it could be a good public relations thing for the Free State Project to just as an additional boost to show that we care about.
We like more animals than just porcupines.
The entire family, yeah. So I thought maybe just to include the whole thing. So that's my suggestion. So.
I'll take it into consideration. It's definitely sweet from a gift perspective. I don't know how I feel about someone having a pet when they can't feed themselves. It's, that it's a liability, and it's a liability you can unburden yourself from by putting them up for adoption. It's not the same as, having a kid and being poor.
I suppose there's pros and cons. I just thought, like, when somebody's...
Excuse me.
Yeah, I recognize that there's pros and cons. I just thought, from the other side of it, you could say, well, if that person is having, issues, just a little bit of a morale boost from the pet being taken care of could help out. So.
Yeah, and that's why a board of directors is a really good thing to have, because I'm not a pet person. So maybe a board of directors is in Shire Sharing's future.
Well, to sort of go off on that, and that's not actually why I got up in line. I just feel like I need to rant for a second. It would be akin to saying, well, you're poor, so you shouldn't smoke or drink. So are you going to, figure out the people that have alcohol or cigarettes in their house and then not give them food because, they're not spending the money on what they could be? But that's not why I got in line. The reason I got in line was actually because I wanted to find out if there were any plans to do like a Sean's Outpost sort of thing anywhere in New Hampshire. And for the people that aren't familiar with Sean's Outpost, it's a homeless shelter in Pensacola, Florida that is funded with Bitcoin. And then I've got another comment after that.
I would love to see a Sean's Outpost in New Hampshire. I mean, if it's needed anywhere, it's in New Hampshire. It's probably significantly harder to be homeless in New Hampshire than it is in Florida, where Sean's Outpost is based. They actually have purchased a plot of land, which they call Satoshi Forest, where homeless people can camp for a few days, few weeks, whatever. They feed people in a food not bombs kind of style, and it's all run on Bitcoin. That's Jason King's organization. I love the idea, just the idea of like regional chapters, because like Amanda was saying, like you really need to have sort of personal, intimate knowledge of the people that you're trying to help so you can serve them in the best way. So a large national charity is not going to be able to have that localized type of knowledge. And regional decentralized chapters seem like really the way to go when you're talking about that. Like you'd need different equipment, for instance, to do a homeless shelter or a homeless outreach organization, which is what Sean's Outpost brands itself as, in New Hampshire versus in Florida. And same thing with Free Aid. Like we've talked a lot about putting out a guide of like how to start your own chapter, another thing that's on the to-do list. And it's different in different places. So I love the idea. I mean, if organizations like Sean's Outpost could put up a little start your own chapter thing on their website, that's something we're planning to do with Free Aid. Haven't gotten around to it yet, but I think that would be really a hit as long as someone was willing to take the responsibility and run with it.
And the main Dale, did you have something on that? The main reason that I got in line, aside from that, was it was mentioned about people being homeless and homeless for various reasons. And if you happen to listen to the latest episode of Sovereign Tech by the Golden Stallion sitting up front, he actually mentions when he first moved to New Hampshire, he lived in his truck. And people were saying, like, well, you're homeless. And he was like, well, I could get an apartment at any time. I just choose not to for the time being because it's easier for me. And since PorkFest, I've been sleeping in that big green thing that looks like a bus that's not a bus. So, technically I'm homeless, but I don't look homeless. Like, I still shower on a regular occasion. I still wear clean clothes. I still have access to a laundry facility. So, there are various reasons that people become homeless, and one reason that I would never buy land is because of property taxes. I've got permanent registration on that big green thing. It cost me $150 from the state of Montana. It's registered to a DBA. So, if somebody did a little bit of digging, they could figure out it's mine. But, I'm not really directly connected to it, and I don't have to pay property tax.
Sorry, I was actually just wanting to expound on something that, waiting for the right time to expound on something Stephanie said. You were talking about how people are kind of uncomfortable talking to homeless sometimes, like you're afraid it's going to rub off or something. I think what that might come down to is that the tactic for panhandling is a kind of a guilt trip. Like, look at you, you've got a car, you're carrying your groceries, you're doing great, and look how poor I am, you should give me some money. And often that's going to go to alcohol or something like that. There's a lot of evidence for that. Again, panhandling will get you more money than getting a job at minimum wage and things like that. So that's why I don't do that. I don't give money to someone who's homeless or something, but I do other things to try and help. And this is sort of what I was thinking about when I decided to go work for the shelter. I wanted to kind of get to know these people, and that's really a very safe environment to do that. When you're actually a volunteer and you're very clearly in that role, then they don't try to panhandle you and things like that. And when you see them in public, the people I got to know, they didn't panhandle me. They knew me from the shelter and things like that. And there's something about that environment that makes it sort of the safe place to actually get to know people and talk to them. And I think if you're just trying to go and talk to the homeless person, there's a sense that they're going to try and get money out of you or try and guilt trip you into doing something. And I think it's just the libertarian in me is not a fan of that's really almost a kind of coercive tactic to guilt trip someone. You're trying to manipulate them emotionally to get them to do something you want them to do, and
or implying that they owe you or something.
Yeah,
we don't like unchosen obligations, right?
Right, it is. It's sort of an imposed obligation, and I really feel that the way we get people to do charity should never involve that kind of thing. I shouldn't leer at you and go, "Are you doing charity? Are you doing volunteer work? And why not? You should." There's people who need you out there. I'd much rather just appeal to, I think that natural inclination that people have, that we want to have a purpose and we want to leave the world a better place than we came into it. That's our immortality in a way, is what can we do? For some people it's their kids. That's a big one, obviously. But if you don't have kids, for instance, then it's your works in the world, and you want that leaves positive works behind. That's your immortality. So I think we should just appeal to that nature in people. And if you don't want to do it, you absolutely should not feel guilty about not doing it. Like, if you're not enjoying it, if it's not fulfilling in some way for you and making you feel fulfilled, then it's not for you. And I don't think you should feel guilty about that.
Yeah, don't be scared to talk to homeless people. It definitely will not rub off on you because, like I said, I'm technically homeless because I live in an RV. Brian used to be homeless. He lived in his truck. And one thing that he pointed out that I don't think that I had mentioned was people that go from short-term apartment to short-term apartment, they're as homeless as somebody that lives in a truck or lives in an RV. And one final point, I just finished talking to Brooke Kelly, who I'm sure a lot of you know because she used to be involved with the Liberty Movement. She was homeless for a long time, partly by choice, and then once she decided she didn't want to be homeless anymore, it took her another year and a half to not be homeless. And she's written a book about it, and I'm going to be publishing that sometime in the next couple of months.
Rob?
Hey guys, before I have two kind of broad questions, but before I even do that, I would just say doing any kind of charitable deed is a noble good, regardless if you have alternate reasons that may go behind that. But that being said, what's the biggest thing that the state is doing that is preventing charitable actions to take place, and where do you see charity in part of a free society?
Oh, that's an awesome question. I think the biggest thing the state is doing to prevent charitable actions is the financial system, the banking system. And I'll give you a couple of examples of this. Amanda, you just said you were having issues with your bank, people writing checks to Shire Sharing, and they're saying, "Oh, no, you can't cash that check because it's made out to Shire Sharing," and they don't have a tax ID number. And so Free Aid had a really similar issue to this. We actually, back in 2010 or 2011, when our first year of starting, this was kind of before Bitcoin really started to catch on, even in the Liberty movement. We started accepting donations by PayPal, And we got our first large donation. It was somebody sent us $1,000, which was really great, and that would help us immensely in just getting the supplies we needed to get set up for doing first aid at PorcFest. But what happened after that was PayPal froze our account, just as though we were like WikiLeaks or something, or as though we were like some, terrorist organization that's trying to give people sunblock at PorcFest or something, So we got that locked down. It was impossible to contact like an actual human being about it. And then 3 or 4 months later, they randomly released the lock with no explanation, never talked to a human being. So it's just the typical rigmarole that you get from a bank when anything, quote, suspicious happens with an organization. So to kind of try to prevent this, Free Aid incorporated as an LLC and got some business bank accounts. And we tried to then apply for 501c3 status, which was a difficult decision as an organization full of anarchists and voluntarists. We're like, well, do we beg the government for permission essentially to say, you don't need to pay us taxes? Do we try to get their approval, or do we just kind of continue operating? And the conclusion we came to at the time was, let's see if we can do this. It may get us more donations and yada yada. We had reasons for it. So our treasurer, Theresa, put a ton of time into preparing this application. She self-prepared it. She spent weeks of her life working on this. We had a lot of board meetings. We discussed it a lot. And we sent it to the IRS. They took a year to get back to us, and then they said, well, no, you can't be a 501c3 because you're an LLC and you need to be a C Corp or an S Corp or something like that. So, and this was also in the wake of the scandal where they were denying the, quote, Tea Party organizations. This was right around that time period. We don't have any conclusive evidence that that was why they denied us, but it could very well be. We may fall into that category to them. So we got denied, and then we decided, well, basically, screw it, we're just going to become a Bitcoin-only charity, and we're going to go outside the financial system. So that's what we did, and ever since then, Free Aid has been a decentralized, sort of non-legal incorporated entity and just been operating on Bitcoin, and that's worked out well for us. We can actually use Bitcoin to, first of all, Bitcoin lets us accept donations from anyone, doesn't matter who. If we get cash donations, one of our volunteers basically buys them with Bitcoin and sends the Bitcoin to Free Aid and gets the cash. Sometimes we even have people who do it at a very favorable exchange rate in favor of Free Aid. So there's that. We can use the Bitcoin to reimburse any kind of expense from travel to medical supplies. We received a donation from Broker, which is a gift exchange that allows you to get stuff on Amazon or other things with Bitcoin, even though if the company like Amazon doesn't accept Bitcoin. So
there's actually a thing that gives you a 15% discount right now if you buy from Amazon using Bitcoin through their site.
Through Broker, yeah.
Oh, is it Broker? Is that the one you're talking about?
There's a couple of them. There's Broker and then there's Purse.io, and those both can give you discounts.
That's who I was thinking of, Purse.io,
okay.
Yeah.
Cool, yeah. So, I mean, it's worked out really well for us not having to ask permission to accept Bitcoin donations. But, of course, people want to donate to charities in the ways that are convenient for them. So you got to make it convenient for people to donate, otherwise they won't. So there's always that problem. But
that's what I was going to ask, actually. While you were talking, it made me think, is there a way to set up a page, for instance, where someone could go through a site that sells Bitcoin by credit card or something and just have it go directly to you? Could you set up a website like that so that it just has the convenience for them so they can pay however they want, but it ends up buying Bitcoin and then sending it to you? That would be ideal,
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I don't know of a way to do that except maybe Coinvoice, which it lets you kind of invoice people in cash and receive Bitcoin. But yeah, that's a good suggestion, Dale. Thank you for that. So in summary, I know I talked a lot, but the state, the financial system, I think absolutely is the thing that hampers fundraising and neuters startup charities.
I have something to add. So what I do for work is I coordinate services for people who have intellectual and developmental disabilities. And so they're entirely dependent on state funding pretty much to live and on state-funded services to help them to do that. And when I look at the way services are determined and funded, the state strangles any kind of opportunity for people to be able to be independent or autonomous in that setting. Because if you make too much money, your services get cut off. If you don't have an address, your Social Security goes down, so you can't afford to go try and find another address. If you want to donate it makes to a specific person, it can put their entire livelihood or way of life, I guess, at risk. And frankly, people feel like they pay taxes to support that, so they don't necessarily want to donate to those organizations as charities because they already feel like they are through their taxes. I think if you want the answer to that question, the state is determined to try and make each of us feel as dependent on it as possible in whatever system that you're working in, whether or not that is banking, human services, or a restaurant. That's what the state is. It's regulation trying to tell you that you can't feed the homeless people from food that you have left over at the end of a day. It's the government who's telling you that you can't make over this much money, or that you can pay this person this much money or this much money based on their arbitrary idea of what is reasonable.
Yeah, there's this, dumpster diving or freeganism. I know people in New Hampshire that really want to do that, and Trader Joe's in Nashua throws out a ton of food that's fine to eat. I had a $35 piece of lamb from the Trader Joe's dumpster once. It was great, but the police, routinely go through that area and kick people out if they're trying to raid the dumpster, and all that food's in the dumpster because it hasn't expired, but the regulations require them to set a certain expiration date, and when it hits that date, even if the food's fine, they have to throw it out. And then dumpster diving in New Hampshire in the winter, it's refrigerated. It's perfect, I
hadn't even thought of that. But, well, I guess my personal case to answer this particular question, I know that the 100-night shelter, they were having to do lots of renovations that all had to do with meeting code. And the building that they rented, for instance, or they leased the building to do this in, it took them a lot of money to raise to do that, and they had tremendous expenses, obviously. But because it changed, like it was grandfathered in so that it didn't have to have a sprinkler system, but because it changed leasers, the leasee changed. Now it was no longer grandfathered in, so now they had to spend like $20,000 plus on putting a sprinkler system in before they could actually, in order to keep the city from coming down on them. To be fair, I think that the city tried pretty hard to work with them on a lot of things and stuff, but there was always these sorts of things, and these are problems for anyone, but it's just particularly frustrating when you're trying to raise money, and it's already a challenging task, so that you can get people in from the cold. And you're worried about a sprinkler system when people are, this is right on the tail end of people dying in the cold in New Hampshire because they didn't have where to sleep that night. And so I think that's it. It's just that red tape that doesn't have, it's not allowed to have any sort of leniency or common sense to it. They're not allowed to go, you know what, we're better off letting them go ahead and open without a sprinkler system in this particular case, because it's a code. It's very black and white. Some committee worked on it and ironed it out, and now it's written in stone essentially, and it seems kind of silly. But that's my personal experience was I know that then and there were some other code issues. There were a lot of code issues that just made everything slower to open, more expensive, and things like that. And in the end, the building was working fine before that, but now, because of red tape, it all mattered again.
We have 9 minutes left. Question?
Yeah. The original rationale for the state taking over from charity was the idea of removing paternalism from the charitable relationship. Is there a question when you start to do charity from a libertarian perspective in a systematic fashion rather than just giving someone money on the street or something, that a form of paternalism will start to sneak back in? Is there, when it's structured, does a separation, when you start to talk, as you were doing earlier, between long-term and short-term goals and that sort of thing, is there inevitably a process by which you start to determine what's best for people. And if that is a danger, then how do you avoid it in carving out a sort of libertarian charitable ethic?
I understand what you're saying. I think that's an excellent question. So I think Amanda asked me to define like what paternalism is. We can ask you to, I'll confirm if I've got it right here. So paternalism is basically like somebody telling someone else, I know what's best for you, acting as their parent essentially, assuming that they can't make their own decisions for themselves and assuming that you know better. So like, for instance, this comes in when the state says, well, you can't eat foods with, a great example of this, speaking of food waste, is, as I understand it, the food shelters, the food kitchens in New York City, you can't serve food unless it's labeled how much sodium is in the food, because they're trying to protect people from salt at the expense of starvation or something like that. It's just kind of nuts. No pun intended. So it's like things like that, where it's like, we know what's best for you and we're going to control you and enforce it, whether you like it or not. And charity, sometimes it can have that element to it, right? Like churches, for instance. Well, we'll help you, but you have to live a good Christian life. You can't be getting pregnant out of wedlock and things like that. And you can't be staying up late. You can't be drinking alcohol.
Or they would have a captive audience to preach to them a certain religion.
Yes.
And a lot of charity. We had tremendously more charity back before it became such a state-run thing. There were so many charitable organizations. A lot of them are religious. So trying to find some sort of secular one, I could see how that would be discouraging to someone, especially if you have a liberal mindset. You'd think, oh, I'd much rather the state run this and get all this religion out of it and stop trying to push a certain religion, because you have this captive audience of people who are dependent on your charity. So
I think the way to avoid that creeping in liberty-focused charities is to have a pull system instead of a push system. And what I mean by that is some charities are really outreachy. They'll go up to you and say, hey, are you developing, like the American Diabetes Association or something like that, hey, are you developing diabetes? Let us help you and do exercise and do this because we know what's best for you. If you have a charity instead that says, we're here if you need our help, come to us if you need it, and just puts the message out there that we're available to help if you want help, that I think can really help with the paternalism aspect, instead of going up to people and saying, hey, you look like you need help, let us tell you what to do.
I absolutely agree with that. I also think that transparency and accountability are pretty much necessary from the foundation up in any kind of organization that's libertarian based, especially if it's going to be a charity, so that if somebody is starting to well, I'm going to use the pet food thing as an example of it, because that's sort of, it's sort of like that kind of, well, I don't feel that that's like, why do you have a pet if you don't have the money to feed yourself? Well, that could be, if you extend that out, considered to be sort of paternalistic in its thing. But what you immediately followed up with, and what I think is exactly right, is, well, that's why I might need a board. Like, that's why Shire Sharing might become a board, because you have to have multiple perspectives and multiple mindsets if you're going to be doing something to kind of offset those things. Because it's not that Amanda is trying to tell anybody what they should or shouldn't do. She just has her own belief system. I have my own belief system. We started this out talking about whether or not you should give money to homeless people, and we all have different perspectives on that too. So I think just incorporating multiple perspectives in an organized way and then providing accountability and transparency to that organization is a really good way to avoid that happening.
This is another thing to think about with this is it not the right, for instance, of a church to say, hey, we'll provide a place for you to sleep and food for you, but if you just attend this sermon in the morning. And you don't have to take their food or their shelter unless you don't have options, right? If you have no options, then you're kind of stuck with that. But that kind of gets into libertarianism, I think, and the whole notion of freedom is having choices and having a free market and not impeding those other choices so that you aren't restricted to, so you're not that captive audience for the church necessarily. And if we believe in a free market for
all sorts of business transactions, should we not also believe in a free market for charity and volunteer work? And should we not open it up and make it easier for more people to do it so that there can be secular options, for instance, that do a good job and that someone can go do if they don't feel like they want to be compelled to go to this sermon so that they can eat that night. I think that's the key, instead of saying, well, no, that's bad that you're doing this thing and that you're being paternal about it. Well, let the free market decide that. If you have a charity that is less paternalistic and actually more, and just acts as a better charity, then maybe in a free market we would have, we would vet those kinds of things and we'd figure out which ones work best, and those would do better in the market.
Last question?
Oh, one more comment on that, just real quick. Sorry, but the thing we have to remember when talking about this is the state has totally failed at removing the paternalism from charity. Yeah, they're not doing it. Like, there are so many strings attached if you go on government welfare or whatever. Like, you have to let people inspect your home in some cases. You have to raise your children a certain way. You have to send your children to government school, give them all the vaccines and all the stuff that the government says is good for them. You have to feed them certain things in some cases with WIC. You're accepting a lot of strings from the government with their money. And an additional option, even if it's a church that you may not subscribe to, may be better than just only having the option of the state and their strings, their particular kind of strings.
In Keene, again, this is my personal experience, in Keene, I heard a lot of stories from homeless people, so whatever I'm telling you is secondhand and probably shouldn't be, take it with a grain of salt, but that's exactly why some of them could not stay in the shelters that the state was giving, the state and city shelters, was because they would do things like drug test you, and if you came up positive, you could lose your place there, and things like that. And again, a lot of homeless people are miserable and they're self-medicating, and that's, or maybe they'd require you to, there were a lot of strings, like you said, and that was why some of these people, if they would end up choosing to be out in the cold at night instead of accepting the strings that were attached to the shelters at the time. And that's why, even the private shelter had some strings, but they were a lot looser. Like, if you left, some people would want to go out drinking at night. Well, once you came in, if you wanted a bed and guaranteed a bed, you couldn't leave again, and you couldn't drink there. You could not have anything except for prescription drugs and things there, and you couldn't leave. If you ever left, then you might not have a bed when you came back, so someone else would come and take it. So it had some strings, but they tried to have them be looser because the goal was so that people wouldn't die out in the cold at night, even if you were a drunk or whatever. If you were an alcoholic, they didn't think you should suffer the death penalty for that.
Yeah, and so all of that kind of comes back to what I was saying earlier about entrepreneurial spirit versus the get a job culture. Is if somebody wants to keep their cat, then instead of being put in a position where it's like, well, Shire Sharing isn't going to give me food unless I throw my cat out of the house. Or watch Amanda Billy Rock videos or whatever sermon we have. Instead of giving them something, I guess what I want to see, what I want to create somehow within the next decade is some kind of situation where people are given the inspiration that they need to move their lives in the direction that they actually want, instead of, like if Daryl wants to stay homeless in his bus, not a bus, that's fine. And if Daryl wants to have a cat on his bus, that's fine. And I don't know. You know what I'm saying? Yep. It's all this. That's part of the strings attached, the get a job culture, and I think that people are not inspired anymore. When people become poor, they stay that way because a lot of what's involved in getting out of that involves pleasing other people, going to a million job interviews and trying to convince every single jerk that you've never met that you're awesome, and you're more awesome than all the strangers you haven't met who also applied for arbitrary reasons, and coming up with adverbs and adjectives for your resume. It's also stupid, and it's so much easier to just start a business, even if it's something small. And I think that if people had more of an opportunity to start a business and were aware that it's an option, because I think people aren't even aware that self-employment is an option, then even if they don't, let's say their first thing is ice cream at PorcFest, and they're not going to be the next Ben & Jerry's, but it's that little thing that makes them realize, or made me realize, I have skills, and I can be adventurous and try new things, you know, and I don't have to be a janitor. And so my personal experience, where I moved from janitor to ice cream magnet to Shire Sharing, and all in working in sales and all the things that I'm doing now is because that opportunity at PorcFest really to start a business, no BS, no paperwork, no bureaucracy, no health board, you know, and just to try something and experiment and see how it works out. And when people give me money and I give them ice cream, and then they're like, this is good ice cream, then I'm not going to be the next Ben & Jerry's, but it boosts confidence. And that's what I want to see is and we're way over time, but I'm talking, so who cares? But, okay. But that's what I want to see. I want to see some kind of program in the future in New Hampshire, motivated, you know, by Free Staters, that works to inspire people to remember that they do have the opportunity to become self-employed. I think that that's the solution, not handouts.
That's really inspiring, Amanda. Good job. Can you imagine if those people in Keene who drive by the Robin Hooders and stuff and yell, get a job, can you imagine if they said, start a business?
Yeah.
I just wanted to elaborate on the point I believe Dale made about it'd be really nice if a charity could just have a way to automatically convert the funds they're getting into Bitcoin or whatever they want. Really, the state has made and will continue, at least this state, the little tax farm we live in, has made that impossible because, one, the credit card companies absolutely do not want that, and they have a pretty big say in it, and two, there's this spooky terrorist thing in these money transmitter laws where such a service doesn't really exist, and any time has tried, has failed. In one case with BitInstant, they ended up indicted. So yes, that would be a beautiful option, but the states has made it impossible, and they may make it even harder. So I would say that the state is making it harder for impromptu charities to exist, and I would also warn that if you were doing that, to be very cautious about what services you use, because just like you had money locked in PayPal, if it gets locked up in one of those services that was violating the law in one way, there probably is no way to ever get the money back.
Here's my thought, though. You can go online right now and buy Bitcoin, right?
Correct, but if there was a service that allowed you to accept payments with a Visa or MasterCard and have that go right into a Bitcoin wallet, that doesn't.
You're buying
really
the Bitcoins and you're just having them. You're just giving like their address as where you want them to go.
Correct.
Right, and then that service is, you know, the credit card's making money off of the transaction and stuff, right?
Oh yeah, for sure.
And they're making some kind of. They're making enough to a little buffer to make it like worthwhile for them to do.
Are you saying that any website that sells Bitcoin is?
It seems like it would just be an interface issue to like have it go into their account instead of whatever other one or something.
It would be ridiculously easy to set up. What I was pointing out that it is very, very illegal, and if you possibly could set up a legal construct that could do it. You'd have to be a licensed money transmitter, and that's another...
And all the strings that come with that, which is that you would have to collect all the AML and KYC information, which is anti-money laundering and know your customer.
Well, you have to do that, period. You need to get approval from all the states that have money transmitter licenses. It's...
Yeah.
Basically, the system was rigged by the people who set up, like Western Union, these original guys, to prevent new competition. And now it's even worse because you have the Patriot Act and terrorism. So really, the state is majorly in your way. So they prevent it from happening. And if someone tried to do this automatically, which wouldn't be that hard, you have risk having all your funds confiscated.
Yeah, I agree. The good thing about this whole idea of a charity using Bitcoin and accepting Bitcoin is that they can never stop the peer-to-peer exchanges. So at Free Aid, for instance, we have a strict don't know your customer policy, and we accept donations in Bitcoin or cash or precious metals, which we've gotten in some cases. And if we need to convert that into Bitcoin to buy something, what we usually do is just find a volunteer and have them buy the cash for Bitcoin. And that is something that I think the state will never be able to stop. So there's always the peer-to-peer exchanges. You can always use local Bitcoins if you don't know anybody directly, or you can just buddy up with a friend, and that's how it'll work.
Okay, so I guess that's it. Thanks for listening. Oh, and a few announcements that I want to make. So Shire Sharing, we're gearing up right now. Delivery is happening on November 23rd. Out of Manchester. We're going to be going all over the state, and we're raising funds right now for the food, shiresharing.org, and there's, if on the right-hand side, a place where you can send a donation with credit or debit card. And I do keep a Google Doc that's public that has a list of all of the donations, and then on a different tab, all of the expenses. So if that interests you at all, the link for the Google Doc is on the fundraising page, not on the main website, but when you click through to go to the fundraising page, it's listed on there in the description. And Johnson is heading up the Keene satellite of Shire Sharing this year for the first time. They're going to start out with just a few, like maybe 10 houses or something that they're going to deliver to, but that's a lot. That's more. When my dad started doing it, he started with one house. So they're having a separate fundraiser. We're going for autonomy in that regard, where Keene is going to raise their own money, secure, get a hold of their own supplies, stuff the bags themselves, deliver them themselves, and there's a whole process from beginning to end. So if you want to donate to them, it's shiresharingkeene.org, right? And Shire Sharing has a Facebook group. It's facebook.com/groups/Shire Sharing, and I recommend that anyone who's interested join the group. You can passively just kind of see all the updates. A lot of stuff is going on this year. I got local businesses involved for the first time. The last 3 years, it's been basically donations within the community, and word of mouth for anyone outside of the community. But we're having a raffle at Murphy's Taproom in Manchester on November 12th, and half the donations in the raffle are from businesses on Elm Street in Manchester. And additionally, Brady Sullivan has donated a massive warehouse space for us to use. And if you don't know who they are, they kind of own Manchester. So that was a big score. They're like, I don't know, they own everything. And so that's pretty cool. And then also this year, the U-Haul trucks that we need have been donated, and it's really growing by leaps and bounds. So join the Facebook group if you want to see all these little updates about how things change. But thanks for listening, guys.
We'd like to invite you to visit freekeene.com. Freekeene.com features audio, video, and blogs chronicling the transition to a voluntary society. Freekeene.com also has comments and discussion forums so you can be heard. Freekeene.com.
I should be in Keene, New Hampshire with the Free Staters.